Hey everyone, how's it going? Chris and Andrew here at West Village. We are in the middle of a teaching series called Collision of Kingdoms, just looking at how the church and the political arena kind of intersect. And throughout the series, we've been taking in questions, and we're just taking some time to answer these questions for you. And so today's question is this: aren't countries like Canada and the United States perceived to be Christian nations, and shouldn't we continue to try and preserve our Christian heritage as much as possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think just as a starting point, I think it's important for us to recognize that neither Canada nor the US are Christian nations. It's true that there were Christian principles and Christians that were part of that founding, but let's be honest, this was the middle of Christendom. Everyone in Western Europe was a Christian, and you still had things like revivals happening. You still had renewals happening, which meant that there were people who grew up in an environment that said they were Christians who said, oh, that's not really following Jesus. Like, we need to encounter him.
And if we just go back and look over the history of how our countries were founded, there were a lot of very unchristian things that happened.
Absolutely. Like the slave trade in the US, right? Like built on something that's like very not Christian, right?
The way we treated, indigenous people when we arrived here.
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that Canada and the US have never been Christian nations. There have been nations that have been founded on Christian principles where some form of Christianity has been, influential at that time, but as a whole, we cannot say like this was God's design for human flourishing perfectly. Right. This isn't, new heavens, new earth being realized right now.
They're not theocratic.
No.
Yeah, there's nothing uniquely, like that aligns us with God in like a special relationship.
Exactly.
Like the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, for example.
Yeah. So I think sometimes we get this idea of like, oh, we're the Christian nation, and we got to go and go out and be like the missionaries to the rest of the world. And yes, we as Christians are called to be missionaries, but it's not, we're not trying to espouse like American Christianity. We're trying to espouse the gospel. Right. And so we got to make sure that we don't conflate those two things. And I think the heart of this question almost starts at that point. So we got to correct that. That being said, I do think there are aspects of Christianity, of Christian values, of sort of better to say like kingdom values, like ways of living that come directly from Jesus, from the Bible, that were part of our nation that are starting to get stripped away. And I do think there's a place for Christians to step into that and say, hey, these things are actually things that you shouldn't be throwing out, that you shouldn't be trying to push away, that we need to preserve because they actually maximize human flourishing and they're going to be better for our culture as a whole. But with that being said, I think a lot of the times that the ways that Christians try and go about that is probably not helpful, in the sense that we kind of look like we're just a special interest group trying to like hold on to something that we feel like is unjustly being taken away from us. And so I think that we have to rethink, as we said in a few of these videos, like not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it, and to do this in a way that actually declares and demonstrates like that Jesus is King and that we follow him in every aspect. So I would think about like just when we see like things that we think like are injustices, like Christians should be the ones on the front lines of trying to reconcile those injustices. So when we go back and even look at our own cultural injustices, things like residential schools, which oftentimes like the church has been part of that problem, huge injustices done, sexual abuses, things like that to Indigenous people, First Nations people, like we as a church should be on the front lines and saying, hey, we want to see care and compassion demonstrated. Even when we're talking about sexual minorities in our country, and we said this when we're chatting about that question a little bit more, but Christians shouldn't just be like they're criticizing particular sexual orientations or gender orientations. Like we should be the people who are caring for people who are struggling and wrestling through like this conflict inside of themselves, in that I'm feeling this way and I'm looking at myself and it doesn't match up.
Yeah, so often we think of, we equate the Christian heritage of the founding of our nation as sort of this golden era for the church, where the church is placed, maybe not in the highest place of authority, but at least at the center of culture. And there's sort of this longing to go back to that place. Should we fight for that? And I think the answer is no. We don't want to fight for the place where the church has power and authority. We want to fight for the values of the kingdom. And so I think that as Christians, that's the fight we should have. And some of that comes with rights and freedoms and things like that. But at the end of the day, what we really want to be fighting for are characteristics of the gospel of Jesus, which are reflected primarily, not exclusively, but primarily through what he teaches us in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, so I think you got to have some skin in the game if you want to critique something that's going down. So you want to, again, we talk about this with pro-life. You want to be pro-life, then you need to be out there like serving single moms who are wrestling through like, I have this kid and I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet. So I think that's a huge part of it. Is like we can't just like complain from the sidelines. We got to get our hands dirty.
Yeah, it's good.